Good morning, good afternoon, and possibly good evening, depending on which time zone you are. This impressive conference has turned the threat of the present situation with the pandemic into an opportunity, organizing the event in an online modality and having attendees from all over the world. The first day, we had already over 2,300 registrations from at least 120 countries. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this first session on education and capacity development and at the intersection of groundwater, climate change, and resilience. The theme 5 of the online conference, coordinated by the Intergovernmental Hydrological Program of UNESCO. My name is Jorge Ellis. I am based at UNESCO's headquarters in Paris, France. It is my honor and pleasure to co-chair this session. As you know, water is a connector to all of the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda. And education and capacity development on fresh water, including the invisible groundwater, is critical to give sustainability to the results being achieved in the context of SDG 6 on clean water and sanitation, in close interaction with SDG 4 on quality education, SDG 5 on gender equality, and SDG 13 on climate action, leaving no one behind. Housekeeping indications have been placed or will be placed in the chat. So Raya, over to you.
Thank you, Jorge, for introducing our session. I have the pleasure to co-chair the session with him. And I am Raya Stephan. I'm the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Water International, which is the journal of IWRA. I'm also a board member of IWRA and was part of the ISC of this conference. And I would like not to take more time and give the floor to Mr. Eddy Moore for our keynote speech. Mr. Eddy Moore is the director of the IHE Delft Institute for Water Education, which is a specialized institute part of the UNESCO family. Please, Eddy, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Raya, and also thank you, George, for the nice introduction. And good morning, evening, and afternoon to everybody globally. I thank you also for the opportunity to say a few words about capacity development, especially on groundwater and climate change, because I do think it's quite important if you would like to make a step forward. And I hope I can make that even clearer with this short presentation. So what I try to do is I would like to give you a couple of reflections actually on the UN Water Accelerator Framework, but also on the 2020 Delft Agenda for Action, which was an agenda that was developed in a conference that was held in May this year, where capacity development was the topic to think about. And I would like to share a couple of lessons learned coming from this conference. Could I have the next slide, please? Then why is groundwater unique? I think I hope you have been able to listen also to some of the other presentations earlier this week. You all know and are aware then that the buffering capacity, I think, is something that makes groundwater very special next to where we are always talking about snow and ice caps. But I do think that groundwater has a bigger potential there and can help us to also overcome a number of the problems that we're facing with climate change. The second one is quality. And with quality, for those who just were in the earlier session, quality of groundwater is not always good, but in a huge number of cases, it's actually the best quality water that we have available. Unfortunately, in a number of cases, this quality we can't assure. It's also changing, and in some cases we have to be quite careful. And the discussion about arsenic groundwater that was in earlier session was, I think, an important one. And the last, the third thing that I think is important is the invisible part of groundwater, which again makes it, I think, a bit special, because that means that there is an added challenge to make clear why groundwater is important, and also what happens if you have a certain action somewhere. And I'm talking, for example, about anthropogenic influences there. Could you tick the button, please? So in the past, we used this method, and that also, I think, was already clear that we had problems in finding groundwater, and actually groundwater is everywhere. Could you click again? So I think with the GRACE satellite, also discussed earlier on Wednesday, I think we made a quite nice step forward, especially if you're talking about global issues. And I do think it is able to capture those global changes in groundwater, especially, which is quite important. But still, I think we lack, say, precise data in the case that you want to implement local measurements there. Could I have the next slide? Just very shortly, why water is important. This is a figure coming from the World Economic Forum from this year. It's a report that they bring out every year. It shows you the impact on the y-axis and the likelihood on the x-axis of risk that they anticipate. And as you can see, maybe you can click once. There are things like, I think, the infectious diseases. Coronavirus, of course, is happening at the moment. So I do think that we will see that this risk will move up to the top right corner of this graph. Can you click again? Another one is water crisis, and that's where I think also groundwater plays a role in there. Personally, I think it's underestimated what the risk and especially the impact is. So the likelihood combined with the impact, I think it should also move up to the right-hand corner. But of course, within the World Economic Forum, it's not about the technical specialists, it's also about the people using the groundwater. And I think that's the most important group that determines the priority actually of what needs to be done. And I think those are the people we should try to convince as a groundwater community in the next step. Could I have the next slide? I think what happened here, and this is a quote coming from the Secretary General from the United Nations in July last year, related to the announcement of the Accelerator Framework for SDG 6. I think a very important statement that is there. One is that if you are looking at the water and sanitation crisis, you should have a holistic, systematic, and multilateral response. But also, I think what he's saying as well is about global health, food security, that we should also look at the resilience of climate change, what this whole conference is also about. So I was quite happy that this statement was already made in July. And I think that with the present conference, we could make a step forward into this direction. Could I have the next slide? What was also mentioned with this in this framework were 5 different accelerators. And one of the accelerators that I was particularly interested in is the capacity development in people and institutions to improve and expand services. Of course, the other 4 accelerators are also quite important. I think they are interrelated, and I will come back to those again. Next slide, please. Then the main challenge for groundwater in view of climate change, especially on societies that depend on climate change, are, I think, twofold. And I think that simplifies the message quite a lot, but I do think there are 2 important issues there. One is salinity, and the other one is recharge. Salinity is increasing, among others, because of sea level rise. And I think, especially if you're looking at coastal zones, the salinity is increasing quite a lot there. I do think that both for salinity and recharge, the anthropogenic influence is also quite important, and we should not forget about that. So for the salinity water quality side, it's the contamination that's happening. For the recharge side, it's the over-extraction next to the droughts that we're experiencing in the site coming from the climate change actions. 5 years ago, in the graphic project, these 3 main say policy recommendations were made. One was to improve the groundwater governance system. I think it's still clearly on the table. The second one is to promote groundwater management strategies to reduce vulnerabilities. Again, I think still a quite important issue. And the last one, to collaborate with partners of specialized knowledge, which I think is still, again, also on the table. Of course, question is then, so what steps did we make in between? So where are we at the moment, and what should be the next steps that we should take? I put down two. One is that I think there's an urgent need to improve the data analysis and processing in combination with data collection. I think data collection is still a very important issue there. Also one of the accelerators that I spoke about before. And the second one is to increase the capacity in people and institutions. Again, one of the other accelerators. I want to focus a bit on the last one. So how can you do this? Because that's, I think, important to know. And I would like to share some ideas with you here. Can I have the next slide? This is coming from the conference that I already mentioned. So the 6th International Symposium on Knowledge and Capacity for the Water Sector. There are a number of actions. You can look them up on the website if you're interested to know more about that. There's also a little bit more detail, so I will only mention, say, a broad indication here, and we'll focus on a couple of them. One suggestion made there was to stop the counting head mentality to measure capacity development. It should be more about the quality of the capacity development than just counting heads. How to do that, there are also some ideas about that, but that was one thing that came out. The second one was focusing on capacity development on inclusiveness and blended approaches. Again, if you're interested, please have a look at the website. I think an important one is the funding for capacity development. And maybe you share that thought with me, often people say, okay, we need more capacity development, but how are we going to do that? And I think one starting point is funding. So I concentrated a little bit on this part. So one is an action that we thought would be interested for funders and development bank is to create dedicated resources for the last mile. So to assure that you have inclusiveness, so that you also reach out to people that are not in the big cities, that don't have access to internet as easily as we do at the moment, but also to people that are in, say, the smaller villages. Secondly is for the capacity development providers. So diversify the delivery modalities, also related to the first point made there, and to invest in capacity to be facilitators of learning processes. So not necessarily the content providers, but also train the trainers. That's the message there. Third one is for funders and capacity development providers is to reach out to the financial sector to increase the knowledge about water investments, and to train water professionals to attract investments with bankable projects. I think it's one of the major barriers that we're seeing at the moment. We think there's enough money, there's enough interest for investors, but how can we make sure that this money is flowing also into the water sector? And I think capacity development on how to achieve bankable projects or something that is interested to investors is quite important. Next slide, please. Then here to install or instill a systems perspective across all water-related research. I think that's also quite important. So I think it's also important to look with funders and investment banks, maybe not only at the water sector, but how can you combine it with health? How can you combine it with energy? How can you combine it with the development of roads? I think in a number of cases like that, it will be easier to find those investors interested in also supporting capacity development and investments in the water sector. And the last point of this series is to foster a long-term forward-looking perspective in capacity development. And that's a little bit more on the content side of capacity development. And we think we should try to look at say complementary meta knowledge such as design skills, didactic and teaching skills, soft skills, but also behavior understanding of social and political dynamics. So to broaden actually the sorts of items that we put in the curriculum of our water trainers and training programs. Next slide, please. Here's one example that we are doing at IHE Delft. That's a program which is called the Groundwater program. It's an Erasmus Mundus program. I think it's very nice because it also allows to work together and also to have students traveling around, in this case in Europe. This is together with the Technical University in Lisbon and also the Technical University of Dresden. And it's about groundwater and global change on impacts and adaptation. Can I have the next slide, please? Here in number 1 to number 8, it explains a little bit why this is important, and I will leave the reading up to you, but I would like to stress the last one. This is number 8, where I think the increased understanding requires education and knowledge and skills in the field of hydrogeology, global change, impacts and adaptation. This increased understanding is not only for the people who are really dealing within the water sector, but I do think it's also important, like what I said, for the financial sector. It's important for decision makers to know that. So I think we have to reach out to also those people and make sure that we also provide capacity development for people on that side. Next to, for example, installing ways how you can create better databases, how you can help out to create possibilities to analyze the data that we have, combine data sets. I think that could be a very strong way forward. And I think we should try to develop that capacity there. Could I have the next slide? So the thematic areas of Groundwatch in this case are hydrogeology, groundwater data collection, climate processes, and a number of quite technical issues. But within those technical issues, we're also focusing on what we more call the soft skills and other skills in there. And I hope that that is a development that also other providers may pick up. And from the IHE side, we're quite interested to collaborate with partners in developing those programs. Last slide. And that gives an overview a little bit of the present students that we receive within the Groundwatch program. And it shows that I think there's an added value in there. I think that's the nice part of having physical sessions is that people are coming from different countries. So another important part in there is the peer-to-peer learning between the students. So it's not only about what you provide, I think, as a lecturer or as an academic, but I think the peer-to-peer learning from students coming from the different country, facing the different problems. That's also why this map was overlaid over where groundwater stress is, help students to appreciate new problems that may not have been in their country at the moment, but may happen in the future, so that they are prepared to those changes. And we hope that that also initiates new innovations, actually, and new ideas in the students. Last slide. I think it's showing some happy students that passed the exams and hopefully are now working in actually the groundwater sector and helping us to really make a step forward here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Eddy, for sharing reflections on the UN Water Acceleration Framework and your actions from the Institute for Water Education in Delft, including the impressive Groundwatch. Thank you for reminding us that the so-called SDG Global Acceleration Framework has capacity development, human and institutional capacities as one of its specific objectives. I guess that we will have time for questions in the plenary at the end of all of the presentations. Dear participants, we have a very interesting and very tight program in this session. We have now 6 motivating presentations. As you probably know, we have in UNESCO 2 global priorities, Africa and gender equality. So we invite you to begin our trip and go to South Africa. Without further delay, Brighton, the floor is yours to present a very interesting roadmap for groundwater capacity development for the South African sub-region. Brighton.
Thank you, and thank you for having me to make this presentation and share our experiences from the SADC region with the rest of the participants to this conference. As introduced, my name is Brighton Munyai. I'm coming from the Southern African region, which comprises 16 member states. And I work for the SADC GMI, which is a regional body for the SADC region to advocate and promote sustainable groundwater management in the region. Today, I'll talk to the roadmap for groundwater management capacity development in the SADC region. I'll talk to a study or work that was commissioned by the SADC GMI and implemented by the University of the Western Cape through Dr. Kevin Peterson, and Dr. Thokozani Kanyerere. So just to briefly highlight what I'll talk about, I'll briefly give a background and also move on to previous capacity needs assessment that were done in the region just to set the scene. And then I'll move on to the scope of the current capacity needs assessment, which was completed in 2018. I'll talk about overall the approach and methodology implemented to undertake that research. I'll look at the outcomes, then I'll look at the roadmap and intervention measures, and conclude by giving you a snapshot of some of the activities that the SADC JMI and its partners have started implementing as way of contribution to capacity in the regional groundwater management. Next slide, please. So just to give a background, the need for groundwater, reliance on groundwater in the SADC member states is fairly huge. And that need is also increasing in light of the impacts of climate change. But however, we note that this ability of the groundwater to contribute to capacity need, to the needs or to the water security of the region remains subdued, mainly and also because of the limited capacity in both the national and the regional institutions. Regional institutions, we are looking at institutions like the river basin organizations. So the SADC JMI, having been established in about 2016, has one of its mandate of developing and building capacity within the member states as it relates to groundwater management. So as I've mentioned earlier on, next slide, please. I'm talking about the work that was commissioned in 2018, completed in 2018 by the SADC JMI. What we have before you now is a summary of some of the key capacity assessments that were done in the region starting from 2001 to 2016. The main issues that come out of those reviews are that there's limited capacity, technical capacity in the SADC member states. There's a need to initiate a way forward with respect to building groundwater management capacity in the SADC member states. And also, it was also highlighted through those various studies that there is need to focus on enhancing and understanding of the groundwater systems that we are dealing with. There's also a very important theme that appears to be coming out that talks to data capacity relating to data requirements for adequate integrated groundwater management, training for database managers, a general lack of capacity at the national and at the river basin level and the local level. And just to come to a conclusion, in 2016, the SADC JMI also commissioned a study that was implemented by Peterson and Pickman. And the general conclusion of that study was that in several countries, there's a lack of appropriate hydrological capacity, both in the public sector and the private sector. And that generally the groundwater management in most of the SADC member states can be viewed as weak. Next slide, please. So in response to that background, the SADC JMI then commissioned a study which was aimed at looking at a baseline assessment of groundwater management capacity needs, capacity for national groundwater management in the ministries and departments responsible for groundwater, capacity at transboundary institutions, priority challenges in terms of groundwater management capacity facing member states. And it also looked at raising finances and for groundwater monitoring and protection in the member states. So maybe the takeaway home from this slide is this is a fairly huge study that was commissioned. What I'll try to do is to focus on some aspects of the study and also see how those are shaping the future of our interventions in terms of formalizing and having a well-structured response to the capacity needs that have been identified from as far back as 2001 or even earlier. So next slide, please. So basically the study involved a desktop review of documents and to get to understand the environment or the institutional capacity needs settings in the member states A questionnaire was circulated to all the 15 member states. There were 15 member states in the SADC community by then. And this was followed by semi-structured interviews with important regional organizations and individuals. And it then ended with the data analysis and reporting. Maybe the framework that was used was an analysis based on categories that related to groundwater challenges, human capacity, availability and access to information and science, funding, existing initiatives, and the capacity within those categories was then evaluated. So in this presentation, I'll focus mainly on the availability and access to information on science. I'll talk briefly in passing about the human capacity. Next slide, please. So moving on to the outcomes of the capacity needs assessment. Unfortunately, my clock is hidden somewhere. I hope I'm still doing fine on time. But moving on to the outcomes of the groundwater management capacity needs assessment, we noted the groundwater challenges that do exist in the SADC member states, and we will not talk about this. And I think a lot of them have been adequately dealt with in several literature sources. One issue that came out was the public sector data collection remains patchy. It is non-existent in some countries, and it is on the general poor. You have issues that were identified to do with databases, which in some cases are overcomplicated, or in some cases they don't exist at all. So those are the disparities that were identified. Briefly, with regard to human and resource capacity, we noted that there is a general lack of qualified professional hydrogeologists at the country level, and this is further impounded by the continuous movement of skills to the private sector. So what we have, that pie chart talks to about 69% of the respondents alluding to the idea that, or to the notion that the departments and institutions are relatively understaffed. And so coming to maybe the main point of this presentation is the availability and access to information and science. And the study noted that there is a low to moderate knowledge about the natural state of the groundwater resources in the respective member state. Next slide, please. I'll take forward this last point on the availability and access to information on the member states. So what you have is on the right is the low and moderate knowledge, which comes to about 79% of the respondents thinking that the region or the institution that they are working in probably don't have a good understanding of the groundwater systems that they are dealing with. And we also noted that though most countries might have national groundwater monitoring, these monitoring networks are mainly used for water level monitoring. And
we have only 1 or 2 minutes left.
Okay, next slide, please. What then that means is we then developed a roadmap. This is just an extract of the roadmap that looks at we postulate that probably the most important aspect is to get the basics right. And by the basics, we mean we need to understand the system. And understanding the system entails groundwater monitoring. And we need to start implementing training activities that focus on groundwater monitoring activities, data collection, interpretation and reporting, and also the development and maintenance of databases. We believe that only when those issues are in place can we have a sound and good footing of the understanding of, or maybe we can move to advanced capacity interventions. Next slide, please. I think I have one left. So next slide, please. So I'll skip that. That talks to the capacity intervention. So we are having a number of activities related to monitoring and data collection that is targeted at young professionals, pilots in the TBAs, pilots in the member states. Next slide, please. And also, we are also looking at the development of national, regional databases, and also promoting the SADC groundwater information portal as the go-to groundwater data destination in the region. and also the revamping and improvement of the SADC groundwater literature archive. So those are some of the initiatives that we are implementing to implement the roadmap. So in conclusion, we have the capacity development initiatives, and we are doing that to achieve water security. Thank you, and apologies for speaking beyond the time.
Thank you, Brighton, for this presentation, which has highlighted, I think, a topic that has been transversal to the conference about the developing knowledge about groundwater, since it's an invisible resource. So monitoring in transboundary aquifer is still another issue. I don't want to take more time. I will pass the floor now to Laurence Thuy from the UNESCO World Water Assessment Program, who will speak to us about gender in groundwater management. Just before giving the floor to Laurence, I would like to encourage the participants to, if they have questions for our panelists, to write them in the Q&A box that they find under the screen. And we hope we have time at the end to address these questions. Thank you. Laurence, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Raya. Dear all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So it's my pleasure to share with you the work done on water and gender by the UNESCO World Water Assessment Program within the governance of groundwater resources in transboundary aquifers, or in short, GRETA project, which was executed by the UNESCO Intergovernmental Hydrological Program, IHP, and was funded by the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. By the way, again, my name is Laurence Thuy, and I'm a gender and communication specialist at the UNESCO World Water Assessment Program. Next slide, please. So in the past 50 years or so, the groundwater abstraction rates have tripled, and this has contributed to major socioeconomic benefits. But this has mainly taken place outside of coherent governance frameworks, with women largely being excluded from related decision-making processes. And indeed, that stands in large contrast with women's pivotal role in groundwater management, as they represent almost half of the workforce in agriculture and food production, and they often bear the daily burden of fetching and carrying water from wells and boreholes due to existing gender roles. So this research aims to analyze the gender character of groundwater governance frameworks and programming on 3 different levels: global, regional, and national. And moreover, to encourage policymakers and practitioners to integrate gender perspectives into legislation, policies, and programs. Next, please. So the research at both the global and regional level was actually based on desk review of existing literature, policies, and frameworks, whereas the research on national level, WAP conducted intra-household surveys in some of these countries engaged in the GRETA project together with environmental staff. Next, please. The research on the national level was carried out in the countries Botswana and Namibia, who both share the Stampriot Transboundary Aquifer System, or shortly STAS, along with South Africa. So the first part of the research analyzed national water laws and policies through a gender lens, and it provided the following findings. Firstly, for Botswana, the consideration of societal issues and the equitable distribution of water in national groundwater laws and policies seems to be largely absent, mainly because these water laws have remained the same since the 50s or 60s, predating independence. Then matrimonial property law provides for equal power in community of property for spouses, but this only applies for civil and not for customary or religious marriages. For this legal pluralism may lead to unequal property rights and hence an unequal access to groundwater. Also, the importance of women's full participation in decision-making is referred to in the policies, but the institutional channels for community participation in the water sector seem to lag behind. Then for Namibia, policies do reflect advancing women's role in decision-making over land and water, and also institutional gender mainstreaming in the water sector. But again, implementation remains fairly limited. Full participation of women in all spheres of society is actually mandated by the Constitution, but the legal and policy basis for strengthening women's participation in community-based natural resources management is lacking. And then again, just as it's in the case in Botswana, conflicts between customary and civil law are an issue. Next, please. Then the second part of the research, it consisted of conducting household surveys in the field and the collection of sex disaggregated data. So for this, we used the UNESCO WAP methodology from the toolkit on sex disaggregated water data, and we applied several of these WAP indicators. This allowed us to test the performance of our indicators in measuring the consistency between national water policies and laws of Botswana and Namibia with the actual situation in the ground. The first version of the UNESCO WAP toolkit on sex disaggregated data was published in 2015 as part of the first ever initiative to achieve a global standard for gender responsive water assessment, reporting, and monitoring. Meanwhile, we have launched the second version in 2019, of which you can see the covers in the bottom of the slide. And it still consists out of 4 tools, which is the indicators, methodology, guidelines, and questionnaire. And it contains 105 gender responsive indicators and 364 questions for the collection of the data. Next, please. So now let's take a look at the field data. What we saw is that in the case of Botswana, the findings of the household surveys showed to a good degree a consistency between the existing policies on expanding water supply and sanitation and the situation on the ground. Then, on the other hand, when respondents were asked who is the primary decision maker in household water matter, a majority of females and males indicated that this role is fulfilled by men. Further results also indicated that women are the primarily responsible for water quality and quantity in the household. And in case of farm water for productive uses, these are men. This is actually somewhat in contradiction with the Botswana IWRA water efficiency plan and its national water policy, who emphasize the need for participatory governance of water resources at the lowest appropriate level to ensure gender equality. Then what concerns productive water use in Namibia, the data suggests that most of the farms in the survey area predominantly consist of male employees, and also that decision-making and implementation related to farm irrigation was or is largely a male responsibility. So based on this, we can conclude that women in the survey area do not have a full or equal role in the management of commercial farms. Somehow in a contradiction with equitable gender roles required in local level water management according to the Namibian constitution. Next, please. So moving to the conclusion, this research has demonstrated that from the methodological point of view, the WAP gender responsive indicators have shown to be reliable tools to gather such sex disaggregated data in these 2 sample areas and to track consistency between policies and the situation on the ground. However, we think it would be very useful to further expand the surveys and to increase coverage. Then second, data from the field suggests that there is indeed some shortcoming in the country's water policy goal of empowerment and full inclusion of women in water resources management. This actually disproportionately burdens women, while men emerge as the primary decision makers in both household and farm water related decision making. Then the Delft research demonstrated that there exists a weak legal and policy basis for strengthening participation of women at the community and household levels in Namibia and Botswana. despite the fact that actually the South Africa sub-region has advanced much in developing such legal frameworks. Second, national water policies seem to lack initiatives to promote gender-balanced decision-making at the national level, such as on community level. And third, the system of legal pluralism that I referred to earlier contributes, unfortunately, to conflicts between customary and statutory law. So these outcomes call for gender mainstreaming and analysis into water governance frameworks at all levels, and specifically in groundwater. Then to wrap up, in terms of recommendation, I just want to highlight 3 of those that we have in mind. The first is the availability of comparable sex disaggregated water data is key to informing and monitoring national, regional, and transboundary water policies. Second, policy approaches to gender mainstreaming must be incorporated into states' national legislation, along with policy enforcement, integrity and transparency, as well as monitoring and evaluation. And lastly, capacity strengthening of stakeholders at all levels is needed on gender-related topics, such as decision-making, participation, and disaggregated data. Next slide. So thank you very much for your attention. That you can also visit our website, or feel free to contact me in case you have further questions that maybe we cannot address in the Q&A later, which of course I will be available for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lawrence, for addressing the gender perspective of groundwater governance. We have learned that groundwater, if not engendered, is endangered. Thank you. Let's deal now with isotopes. Christoph Henrich from the International Atomic Energy Agency will bring us to Central Asia and Europe. Christoph, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jorge, and good morning from Vienna. My name is Christoph Henrich. I work as a program management officer in the Division for Europe in the Department of Technical Cooperation of an organization called the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for the organizers of this conference to give us a slot to present our project here. And I'm only presenting on behalf of a big team, including my colleagues, Oliver Kraft, Julia Vistavna, and Sofia Lipenkova in the agency, as well as all these beautiful names of 38 counterparts in the countries of the Europe and Central Asia region, representing 27 countries. We are presenting today a new project that we started this year, which is focusing on enhancing regional capacities for the isotope-based assessment of water resources in the context of adapting to climate change. Next slide, please. Just to set quickly the context, we are a UN-affiliated organization based in the UN campus in Vienna. We were founded in 1957, mainly around the issues of non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, safeguards, and verification. But alongside that, the institution has been growing to also provide assistance in the field, or in the nuclear field, to its member states. And therefore, our motto is not only atoms for peace, but also for development. Next slide, please. So these are the 3 pillars of our work. As earlier said, safeguards and verification remains a very important part of our work. This is also how we're mainly known to the wider public, as well as safety and security, ensuring that the work with radiation, ionizing radiation, is done in a safe and secure way. But a lot of our work, and actually a lot of our 2,500 people that are working in our headquarters in Vienna, focusing on what we call science and technology. Next slide, please. And I will get to this in a few slides what that means in detail for this project. But we have since roughly 1 year a new Director General. His name is Rafael Mariano Grossi. And he actually, when he was elected DG last year in December, his first trip was to the COP25, which I believe shows the commitment of our organization of the importance of climate change, not only in the obvious field of nuclear energy as a low carbon form of energy generation, but also the use of nuclear technologies such as isotopes to support our member states in adapting to climate change or monitoring of it. Next slide, please. So we don't really have a dedicated climate change program. We work in field of activities that are more obvious, such as nuclear energy, safety, radiation technology, or knowledge management, what I have already referred to. But we also work a lot in the areas of health and nutrition, for example, in cancer therapy, offering radiotherapy to cancer patients, or nuclear medicine. We're working in the areas of food and agriculture, such as investigating soils optimizing soils for crops and agriculture. We work closely with the FAO on this. We have a joint division that is based in our laboratories in Cybersdorf, and on water and environment. And the area of climate change is cross-cutting. So we are actually investigated in which projects are we addressing climate change issues, and the result was that around 1/3 of our projects are really directly linked to addressing climate change issues, and water is one of these areas. So let's look a little bit more in detail in this. Next slide, please. So the problem statement of this project that I'm introducing today was basically that the better understanding of complex aquifer systems, and I'm sure everyone knows that here, and groundwater surface water interactions is actually indispensable in order to have an effective integrated water management, because if it is not fully understood how these aquifers interact with each other and work, it is pretty difficult to come up with an effective integrated water management for these aquifers. Isotope hydrology, on the other hand, is an excellent tool for the characterization and the understanding of aquifer systems. And the proficiency in isotope-based techniques and capacity to apply them differs significantly among the region that we're looking at, which is what we call Europe and Central Asia. Next slide, please. Why isotope hydrology? So isotopes are used as a powerful tracers of fingerprints of source and movement of water. This is the nice graph that summarizes this. Climatic conditions, climate change studies, the geochemical and hydrological processes, as well as dynamics of hydrological processes and groundwater ages. And they allow for a rapid understanding of the hydrological system that may otherwise require years or decades of monitoring. And in some cases, they are also a unique tool, for example, in the case of age dating, recharge rates in arid waters, and they can also be cost effective. Next slide, please. And therefore, as I said, we have launched a new technical cooperation project, which is entitled Evaluation Groundwater Resources and Groundwater Surface Water Interactions in the Context of Adapting to Climate Change. This is our region. The red countries that you see there are participating countries in this project. And the objective of the project is to enhance evidence-based decision-making in support of SDG target 6.5. The project started this year in 2020. It is planned to last for 4 years. And as I had mentioned earlier, we have 27 countries participating from this region, the red one highlighted, from 38 institutions. Our funded budget of the Technical Cooperation Fund, which consists of voluntary contribution from our member states, is a little bit more than 866,000 that we are able to deliver to these participating countries over the duration of the project. But we are also having non-funded components that we hope to seek and are able to mobilize some resources throughout project implementation. Next, please. So what are we actually trying to do? And that is why it is linked to this session. As I had mentioned earlier, the knowledge of isotope hydrology techniques in the context of water differs significantly in our region. We have countries that are participating which are highly advanced of using these techniques, and we have countries where the existence of these techniques is barely existing. So through this project, we first of all hope to increase the awareness of these techniques in countries where that knowledge is not yet there. And we also want to use this significant difference of knowledge and applicants of these techniques in our member states to transfer the knowledge and build the capacity involving higher advanced countries in these techniques and transferring the technologies and the knowledge to the lower or where these technologies are less advanced. We want to answer specific sub-regional and transboundary questions, which I will a little bit explain in the next slide what that means exactly. There is a regional monitoring network, but we want to enhance and sustain it. And we want to ensure that these project results really lead to policies and follow-up actions so that isotope hydrology becomes a commonly used tool to inform the water management and questions. Next slide, please. So these project case studies are actually a central pillar of our project, because on the one hand, they are expected to enhance the cooperation of the counterparts, but not only the counterparts, but also advanced countries that are participating. We want to build the competencies through this project. What that means, I explain on the next slide. And we also want to, at the same time, provide concrete answers to concrete questions that were submitted by our project counterparts. So, for example, we're looking into contamination problem of coastal aquifers, or one case study focuses on using isotope hydrology, I believe for the first time in these regions, on transboundary karst aquifers in Bosnia and Herzegovina, on Montenegro. Other countries want to focus on vulnerability assessments of stratified and transboundary aquifers. We also have a case study focusing on Bulgaria, Ukraine, Romania, on source age and recharge patterns of groundwaters. And we have a case study on that focuses on the Ciadaria River Basin, as well as using environmental tracers for nitrate contamination. So as you can see, the topic is quite broad, and have reached my time. So please, next slide, and then I will finish up. We are an organization that has limited support. We provide support to the countries with equipment for sampling, with knowledge and expertise. We are training them through training courses in the use of these techniques. And next slide, please. And we basically consist of this team. As I said, my colleagues from the agency, and then also this nice counterpart picture, which has been taken in February this year. And I can't believe that we are all standing that close to each other. It seems like from a different time, although it was still this year. Therefore, I have presented on behalf of this team, and we thanks again for this opportunity to present here. And if you have any questions, please contact us. We are actually presenting here to make others aware of this project, to seek for cooperation, and to ensure that these techniques are increasingly used everywhere. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Christoph, for this very enlightening presentation about the concrete application of isotopes regarding the improvement of groundwater knowledge. Now I would like to move to another region of the world, sub-Saharan Africa, where groundwater is very important, as it's often the only source of water, and give the floor to Kirsten Danert from the Rural Water Supply Network and Ask for Water. Please, Kirsten, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Greetings, everybody. My name is Kirsten Danert. I work for Ask for Water here in Switzerland, and I'm also the co-lead of the Rural Water Supply Network theme on sustainable groundwater development. Today I'm going to present to you a story of 16 years of collaboration and experience in this area, which actually makes us a teenager, so watch out. Next slide, please. So the reality is that drilled boreholes are vital for the SDGs, particularly SDG 6.1, and particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. The problem is that we face challenges of poor quality siting, design and completion. And as a result of the inadequate construction of boreholes, there's premature failure of drinking water supplies. And underlying that is really, in many countries and many organizations, inadequate technical and managerial competence to properly manage drilling programs and challenges within the operating environment that make it difficult. So I'm going to talk about a multi-stakeholder initiative that's been running since 2004 within the Rural Water Supply Network, and which has been trying to raise professionalism of borehole drilling and its management. Next slide, please. So what do we do? Well, the left looks like quite a linear process. It certainly wasn't, but just to kind of explain, kind of standing back, there were assessments in 13 countries in the sub-region, face-to-face training, online training, a whole suite of guidance, manuals and training materials produced, some of which you can see on the right of the slide, left of the slide. We developed a number of animated films, which are pictured below, which I encourage you to look at, blogs, webinars and seminars. We spent $1 million in total over 16 years with different funders, but the core partners being UNICEF, SCAD and WaterAid. There was consistent leadership. I've led this throughout the 16 years. I started as a young professional, and the initiative has been a real process of continuous learning and harnessing opportunities. Next slide, please. So what methods have we used? Well, we've been really trying to inform people through the website of the RWSN, through newsletters and the online community of over 1,000 members on groundwater, trying to understand in-country realities through assessments and through the online courses, developing materials that I've mentioned, training, but above all, really sharing and trying to inspire others through the courses or the blogs or the exchange, and encouraging people who are building capacity and trying things out to share what they're doing as well. And you can learn more on the website, which is linked, which is noted down there. Next slide, please. So what have we achieved? Well, the concept of drilling professionalism is actually on the map. It certainly wasn't when we started in 2004. There's a wealth of materials, that are published and freely available. Others have been inspired to take action. I was just exchanging with WaterAid, for example, who are really trying to overhaul their procurement processes and improve the quality of their drilling as a result. Hundreds and probably tens of hundreds of professionals have been exposed to the topic. Other organizations have also made changes. UNICEF developed a toolkit for procurement and contract management. And what's really exciting is a growing interest in this kind of what was an obscure topic by academic researchers as well. Next slide, please. So what are the problems? Well, the fact is that reliable long-term funding for in-country training of professionals is woefully inadequate, and investments in strengthening capacity are marginal. So despite a big program with a lot of drilling, there's very rarely investment in capacity strengthening alongside that. And what we're seeing in many countries, including the US, is the older generation of people who were rigorously trained, retiring, no longer working, and the younger people haven't had that rigor of training and mentoring. So we have a generational issue as well. I'm encouraged by new platforms and partnerships. So the AMCO's Pan-African Groundwater Programme is great, and a starting point to hopefully bring in more resources and partners to further strengthening capacity on the continent. And I'm really fast in my presentation. So my last point really is a call to action is to join hands and invest more. I mean, 1 million over 16 years is very, very little, and we need 10-folds of that investment in raising drilling professionalism in the future. Next slide, please. So A huge thanks to all the partners who've been part of this initiative over the last 16 years and the funders who are listed here with the kind of core partners in bold. And a thanks to you for listening. And I hope that I finished early enough that I can have some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerstin. We invite you now to move together from sub-Saharan Africa to India, a country where groundwater has a critical relevance. There, Subrata Singh from the Foundation for Ecological Security is waiting for us to share reflections on co-creating knowledge and on the conjunctive use of water. Subrata, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, thank you for the opportunity. Uh, I uh, I represent Foundation for Ecological Security along with my colleagues Pratiti and Ranjit as the co-authors, and we have Ruth Menzintake from the International Foundation, International from Food Production and Research Institute, and Thomas from ICRISAT as the co-authors. Next slide, please. What I'm sharing is a learning from the project that we have been implementing across 5 states, across 1,000 villages, and we are at this juncture where we are trying to scale the work to about 3,500 odd villages across the 5 states in the country in the next 3 years. Just to understand what we try and bring in as a discourse is the water as a common resource. More and more it is being understood and looked at as a private resource, which actually leads to further degradation and and as a resource, what we see is water is highly subtractable, and it is very difficult to keep people away from the use of water. As in the diagram, what we see is as the resource that flows across landscapes, and there are multiple resource use systems and multiple users, which demands kind of a polycentric approach to governance. And there is a need to address issues of both upstream and downstream. And further, when we look at groundwater, the invisible nature of the groundwater further adds to the complexity in water governance. Next slide, please. And what we see as a larger challenge is the unsustainable water management, and which actually leads to reduced agriculture production, reduced ecosystem services, and unreliable and unsafe domestic water. And what we see is there are high investments in improving water supply, but when it comes to sustaining the benefits of over time, it's pretty weak. The water easily depletes if there are no coordination among users, and institutions related to water governance are not effective. The blueprint approaches or the top-down approaches do not make a larger impact, and basically from research and practice where what we understand is self-governance by communities can be an effective means of better sustainable management of water. Based on that understanding, we believe the important need is about improving water literacy as well as governance mechanism on the ground. Next slide, please. What we use is Ostrom's theory of commons, where we talk about developing operational rules, collective choice rules, as well as constitutional rules and the institutions need to work on this to evolve better water governance mechanisms on the ground. When we look at operational rules, we talk about rules of protection, rule against damage of the infrastructure, rules related to operations of the water infrastructure that we have. In collective choice rules, we look at rules related to withdrawal of water, withdrawal of resource units, or about irrigation systems. And when or enforcing restrictions on water intensive crops, or in terms of creating of new structures. In the constitutional rules, we try and work with understanding of how to understand water through different different data points from on the water resources, and try and work towards mechanisms of how to deal with this situation. And finally, the most difficult kind of rules that might emerge are to an extent of looking at how to decouple land rights to water rights, because most of the depletion of water resources, especially through deep borewells, is happening because of the clearer understanding of privatization of water resources. Next slide, please. Here I would like to bring in the tools that we use for improving an understanding about water at the community level, and how does this enable communities to come up with rules and regulations that I just mentioned in the last slide. An important part of this discussion is about engaging with a process where people need to look at the system at large, rather than just the resources that needs to be worked on, or just the water resources. So there is a need to look at what we use is community-based system dynamics to build in the mind maps of the community about the interlinkages, and try and see what needs to be done to assist the structures that we need to say rejuvenate or restore or build. So the clearer understanding about what are the upstream issues, what are the downstream issues, what are the command area issues, are something that is necessary for the entire planning. Next slide, please. Yeah. Based on this understanding, what we have also developed tools such as this composite land assessment and restoration tool, which is more of a Android kind of application that helps in simplifying complex science in terms of the geohydrology, the land use, land cover, the lithology of the area into color-coded maps that can help communities to take decision on where recharge is possible, where recharge is difficult, which are the surface storage areas, or which are the areas where recharge can take place more effectively. Next slide, please. Along with it, the kind of tools that we developed along with International Food Policy Research Institute and ICRISAT is about the simulation games related to water, which help the games help in bringing in the understanding of how individual actions can impact collective resources, and this understanding helps in building the discussions around the collective choice arrangements, or the constitutional rules that needs to be done. This, along with the discussions on say crop water budgeting, and quantification of water actually leads to decisions about what crops needs to be grown, what practices needs to be followed, and how one can understand to what extent water is being recharged and to what extent the water is being used by communities at the local level. Next slide, please. This is some of the extract from the on the results that we see on the ground. Different regions of the country actually presents different kind of responses. And say, for example, in Rajasthan, which is a semi-arid dark zone in terms of over extraction of water and mixed farming systems, you see rules, as extreme rules such as ban on drilling of bore wells or sharing of bore wells coming up. In Karnataka AP, where it is more prevalent in terms of tank systems, we see the revival of the tank systems in helping use of water on the ground. So overall, what I say is there is a need to look at water literacy as a very important component when we're looking at water management as part of water education. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, I wanted to thank you for your very insightful presentation on India, and I would like to move now to Brazil, to Ranjan Chakrabarty from the Adelphi Institute in Germany. He will talk to us about the project in Brazil, a web concept to assist study on managing aquifer recharge. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you very much. My name is Ranjan and I work as a researcher with Adelphi in Berlin. We thank IWRA for the opportunity to present our work, and thank you, Raya and George, for chairing this session and the nice introduction. I will present work which has been done in the Smart Control project by some of the project partners, mainly the Universidade Federal de Pernambuco in Recife, which is in Brazil, the Technical University in Dresden, and Adelphi Research in Berlin. Next slide, please. So I would like to present a capacity development approach which focuses on optimizing managed aquifer recharge systems and to look at better at the contents of this. I would like to give a very brief introduction to the topic, although I know that you're all groundwater specialists, but just to be on the same page, looking at managed aquifer recharge application, there are various reasons for applying this. And generally, MAR should solve problems related to water scarcity and also to water quality with providing storage and treatment. It requires temporarily available abundant water resources, which can then be used to be infiltrated. And it can also be applied to prevent saltwater intrusion and also to protecting groundwater and freshwater ecosystems. Now there are many risks to the application of MAR, which need to be addressed. Health risks are related to water quality, for which adequate treatment in the MAR process or prior to the MAR process or even after the MAR process is required. Technical problems which are related to clogging, recovery efficiency, salinization, or insufficient residence time for adequate treatment. There are also environmental and societal risks related to climate change and economic development, which lead to less water availability or more water demand. Finally, there are also risks related to resource constraints, insufficient infrastructure, and capacities for safely running a MAR system. Now, in order to address these risks, the Smart Control project has developed remote monitoring systems with tools and a capacity building strategy to best make use of these. Next slide, please. So The risks of MAR application are assessed, managed, and mitigated with the usage of smart control. For its efficient usage, a small demonstration case is set up and a capacity and solution development program is applied. So the small demonstration case means we install remote monitoring sensors in an existing MAR system, which is then the demonstration case. And around this small demonstration case, we set up a capacity and solution development program. So this program basically consists of 5 steps. First, we have bilateral meetings and workshops with stakeholders to assess the needs and risks of the MAR application in their region. So not only of this specific case example, but also of other MAR applications in the region. In a second step, the application potential and benefits of the smart control software to address these risks are elaborated and application options are identified. And a hands-on training on the smart control tools is organized with interested stakeholders. So here we look at what kind of risks which we have assessed can we actually address or can we solve. In the third step, the partners develop a concept for the application of the smart control approach and then present the developed draft solution to the beneficiaries in a fourth step. So the fourth step is then mainly a public event to which all kind of interested stakeholders are invited, and we present how our tools can solve the most urgent problems they have. Finally, then the solution is further elaborated in joint development workshop with core stakeholders and then is suggested for an implementation in following project. Next slide, please. So one of these smart control case studies is in Recife, Brazil. Here we have many challenges to be addressed. Insufficient water supply led to increased drilling of private wells, which resulted in overexploitation of groundwater resources. So these sinking groundwater levels, at some points, a reduction of the piezometric levels were up to 50 meters in 25 years could be determined. A trend that is still observed only in a few locations is that water levels start to stabilize and slowly recover due to various interactions and restrictions which have now come up. So the sinking groundwater levels led to soil subsidence hazards, higher contamination risks due to the proximity to the sea, and possible saltwater intrusions. The conceptual model of the Recife metropolitan region aquifers, which is on the right image, shows you the multi-layer water sources and their connections, as well as the processes of salinizations. So here we have the problem of reduced natural recharge rates and rising pumping rates associated with the construction of improperly sealed wells, which have led to salinization of the deep aquifers and now need to be solved. There are more problems and more complex interrelations, but I think due to the time, I'll not go into these details. Next slide, please. So regarding the application of the smart control approach, the public administration in Recife is interested in addressing the issues of decreased groundwater levels and have suggested to look at setting up a pilot plant in a public market. This pilot plant, of course, also has risks to be set up, and we can look at these risks following the process. So in the capture zone, we have the risk related to collecting sufficient water and also collecting the correct quality of water. In the pre-treatment, we need to look at adequate pre-treatment to treat water to a level which can then be infiltrated. In the recharge, the subsurface storage, and the recovery process, we have risks of clogging. We also have risks of losing the water due to horizontal groundwater flow. And we have a risks of not having high efficiency in recovering the water. later, once the water is recovered, we again have a risk of water quality, so we need post-treatment. And the final risk that we want to minimize is, of course, the public health of the community. And these are just some of the risks which we look into. Next slide, please. So for generally, first of all, looking into the viability of a MAR system for this public market, we applied feasibility tools to this case studies and assessed the basic technical criteria, which is the water balance, the quality and suitability of the aquifer, and the target storage volume, which we need to store in the aquifer, which is required to meet the water demands. The results of applying this feasibility tools showed that an aquifer storage and recovery system could be applied, but still many uncertainties remained even after applying this tool. Next slide, please. So here, the tools which were developed in the Smart Control project can now be applied. So the web-based tools developed on the Innovas platform, which is a platform having a lot more tools also for groundwater management, optimizing groundwater management. But these 4 tools are new tools, which especially look into optimizing the MAR process. And they look into addressing the following uncertainties. The tool number 1, which is a risk assessment tool, will address public health risks with a quantitative microbial risk assessment and a heat transport model for the hydraulic residence time estimation. The initial risk assessment can help to identify and quantify the actual health risks and is the basis for efficiently addressing these. The second tool addresses technical risks. So we have online monitoring of water quality, which ensures the quality issues are discovered on time and alert messages are given to the operators so they can act immediately. The third tool is a tool addressing infrastructure, resource, and capacity constraints. And due to the time, I just mentioned shortly the fourth tool, which looks into societal development risks like climate change and urban development, and looks into advanced modeling and also showing some different scenarios. So thank you for your attention. And if you have questions, comments, there's a chat box. And I would also like to mention the other co-authors who have contributed to this presentation: Annika Conrad, Susana Gico Montenegro, and Lucille Araujo and Kathleen Stephan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ranjan, for wrapping up quickly. And yes, I would like to encourage the participants to write their questions in the chat box. The panelists can answer them directly also. If Eddy is still there, there's a question for him.
Yeah, I'm still there, yes.
Okay, Eddy, so there's a question for you. One of the participants would like to know if you can explain how we can ensure that the donors also support projects on behavioral change and capacity building in water sector, which are little intangible and long-term outcomes.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much for the question. I think it's also been pointed out in some of the other presentations. I do think that we still need quick fixes sometimes because there are urgent problems where we really need to do that. So I can appreciate that we need donors also supporting those quick solutions. But I think there are also other donors, and there I think pointing out to them things about sustainability and a long-term vision is quite important. With sustainability, also something else is addressed by some of the other presenters. That's about operation and maintenance. I think taking into account operation and maintenance also as a part of the project and not only an investment in, for example, drilling wells or having new equipment being installed or a lab facility, I think is a crucial part of ensuring that you create sustainability. And then in view also of the quick changes that we see around us, so meaning climate change, but also population density change. Also, I think with the coronavirus, things are changing quite rapidly. We require that people are able to participate and act on those changes. So again, I think a longer term sustainable solution is required. So my advice would be to actually invite donors that you are talking with to sit at the table and to discuss with them not only what you want to do now, but also how they want their investment look like in 5 years or 10 years to come. And creating together with them this long-term vision on what you would like to do. So that would be my advice actually to do, but I do also acknowledge that it's not always easy because donors have to present to their public or their clientele as well what they are doing, and then capacity is not always or capacity development is not always the most tangible project, but I think it's very important to do that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Eddy. There are many questions for Kirsten. I think even if you had a short presentation, you have raised a lot of interest. I would like to give you the opportunity to answer one, and then you can answer them directly in the chat box if we don't have time. So one question is, what do you think? Why do you think there's very little will toward investing in capacity building programs and creating enough skills at grassroots level? And do you think that this skill can be looked at as a livelihood option?
I think it goes back to the privatization wave that started in the 90s, when these services were moved out of the public and into the private sector. I don't think it's only about drilling, but it's really affected drilling. And so there was like a sense of, oh, it's now in the hands of the private sector, they'll deal with it. And that, coupled with a lot of emphasis on efficiency, value for money, has really pushed donors and organizations to focus on outputs rather than really thinking of the bigger picture and capacity. And yeah, so it's been neglected. It's been neglected. Vocational training has been neglected across the board, you know, since then, particularly. And in terms of livelihoods, absolutely. I mean, you know, talking to drillers in Nigeria who are so proud of what they're doing, and particularly manual drillers who are able to provide services, many self-supply services. It is a livelihood option, not only for those providing the wells, but also for those able to drill wells and not only improve their domestic use of water, but also run businesses. So certainly in terms of improving livelihoods, particularly around self-supply, the potential's huge, absolutely huge. I mean, there's already been a presentation at the conference, a paper that we did together with Raphael, looking at, you know, showing the extent of self-supply in continental sub-Saharan Africa. So yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kirsten. I saw that there was a question for Lawrence. Let me go back. Yes, so your presentation was very much appreciated, especially the disaggregated work, the disaggregated work aspect. Is there any initiative possibility to look at age disaggregated indicators?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. It's in line with the other question that I received from, I cannot find her name, from Ashworth Hale. In fact, we usually focus on sex disaggregated data. Unfortunately, we have to make certain choices. It is extremely interesting indeed to also look into other components to disaggregate the data into, for example, age or class, social standards. We have included to a minor extent also age. And indeed, we saw interesting discrepancies between the responses of people in different age classes. So both women and men from younger age, they tended to give responses that show that they consider the management of water to be a shared task, let's say. Whereas actually people that are older, in the older age classes, they tend to see it more as a divided task. They see men being in charge of water-related decision-making for enterprise or for farms, so for productive, for production, and women to be in charge of the domestic water decision-making. And so that was very interesting to see that the younger generation tends to have this different view, and they see it to be a joint decision-making process. Yes. We are still in the progress to roll out our capacity development program. And in the future, we will again have, hopefully, perhaps in the GWETA project, another phase of data collection. And it is our hope that we will have the possibility to also go inside other ways of disaggregating the data, not only sex, but also, as you suggested, age or social class. I hope this answers Elena's question.
Thank you, Lawrence. I'll take a last question, I think. I think it is addressed to Subrata as it speaks about communities. And what is the impact of drilling groundwater for deep well or shallow well within a community? Example, in a subdivision, 80% of household extracts under groundwater due to water shortage from the water system supplier. And is land subsidence or sinkhole possible in the future?
To answer this, I think an important, it does impact because there has to be a planned approach to drilling of borewells, because within the same aquifer, when several wells are dug at different depths, it impacts the people who actually have already been using the borewells. So and therefore a mechanism is necessary to determine, at least at the community level, to determine what needs to be done, to what depth it needs to be done, and how can they manage the resources. So that is something that there has to be both norms at the government level, but norms at the community level to manage it.
So special thanks to all of our speakers for the nice presentations, contributing to make visible the invisible water resources. And big thanks to all participants. We have had a very interesting session. We want to specially invite you to join the second session on groundwater education and capacity building, taking place today in the afternoon at 17:25 Central European Time as part of a joint session. We will try to come back to you after the conference with written reactions from our speakers to your further questions. The answers will be available at the website of the conference. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.